All right, welcome back. How's everyone doing? Good? Good. Getting swing of things. So a brief announcement, which probably won't apply to many of you, but the Federal Society is a group on campus. I'm the faculty advisor. It's a conservative libertarian organization that focuses on constitutional law, but we always have a lot of debates and fun stuff. We always do a good job of presenting both sides of every issue. There's a kickoff meeting tomorrow at 11, room 316, Torchy's Tacos. I presume those of you with jobs can't come, but if any of you are around during the day, please stop by. I will be there. I'll be offering some remarks about the Constitution. Otherwise, we'll be having a Supreme Court roundup in a couple weeks. We'll be having a live event. Unfortunately, though, at 11, which sucks for you. And the reason why we have 11, let me explain, is it's the only time when all the 1Ls can make an event. We've tried to have events at 5 p.m. before, and no one shows up. That means all of you. So unfortunately, we can't have nighttime events. We've tried it, and no one comes. So that's why we hold them at 11. So if you can come, wonderful. If you can't, my apologies. Yeah, I was a night student my first year. When I went to law school, we had a very big night program. And if we had an event at 5, night students would actually get there a little bit earlier for an event. But for whatever reason here, we've tried it. It doesn't happen. So unfortunately, we can't waste time with it, money, because Torchy's tacos are not cheap. I don't actually like them. I don't know why people love them so much, but I don't, people really like them. I don't know. It's a Houston thing. I don't know. Overrated, right? It's not. Yeah. Okay. Awesome thing. Okay. Any questions about anything so far? We've talked about, in the last class, Youngstown, and we talked about McCullough. These are two very, very important cases, and I hate squeezing them into the same lesson, but they flow. And I think after reading today's cases, you'll see why I covered those cases. Youngstown, if nothing else, provided a distinction between the very rigid approach of Justice Black and the very pragmatic, flexible approach of Justice Jackson. And we will see those exact same two themes repeat in Clinton v. New York between Justice Kennedy and Justice Brier in dissent. Any questions on McCullough, necessary and proper? We'll do a necessary and proper again when we cover Obamacare. I promise you will not get away from it in this class. Okay? All right. So today we are focusing on Article 1 and Congress. Okay? It's nice and big so you can see it. Oh, yes, sir. Sorry, I didn't see your hand.
I just had a quick question about necessary and proper.
Yes, sir.
It seems in some of the examples that is applicable when things are kind of like technically flow together. Like you have the authority to build, mail roads and post offices, which it also would give you authority to buy trucks.
Right, exactly.
So is there ever situations where it doesn't apply like that?
Obamacare.
Okay.
So to give you a little preview, only because Mark asked, the Chief Justice had one line in his opinion, which you probably didn't even notice much, but Chief Justice Marshall wrote, the necessary and proper does not confer a, quote, great substantive and independent power. What does this mean? So the way I explain this is, the expression the tail wags the dog, right? Where the tail is actually bigger than the dog itself, right? Usually it's a dog, which is a big part, and the little tail thing follows it. But there's an expression that the tail is so big, it's actually bigger than the dog, right? What happens if the thing they're trying to do is bigger than the actual enumerated power? So use your example, right? They have the power to have a mail system, right? What if they try to, I don't know, create a mandate where every single American has to go deliver mail? They have to physically go up and carry mail. Do you think they could do that, Mark?
No.
Yeah, but it would make the mail system so much more efficient, right? You don't have to hire any mailmen. Everyone delivers their own mail. Everyone has to go to an office, pick it up, and then deliver it to their neighbors. Why not? What's the problem there?
Well, the problem is that you just kind of ordered me, I guess, even against the will of the people to do something.
Yeah, but it's convenient to having an efficient mail service. What's the problem? Want to take a stab?
I was just thinking maybe since it said in the Constitution that they have to handle the post office and stuff, you can't tell us to do it?
Well, you're right. So there's a slavery issue there, right? The government can't compel you to do stuff. They have to pay you. That's why an unpaid worker is called a slave, right? But let's say they paid you. We have a draft. If you're of age, you have to register with the Selective Service. Men only, not women, is an interesting case about that. Let me give you a more practical example to Mark's question. This is a preview of Obamacare. Let's say Congress determines that we have all these people who don't have insurance, and they can afford it. And the problem is they only buy insurance when they're sick, right? These people are sitting there healthy, and they only buy insurance when they're sick. And when they're sick and they haven't had preventive care, they're in really bad shape. So what's Obamacare going to do? Mandate that everyone buys insurance now. That way, when they get sick, they're going to have insurance, and they don't go to an emergency room. I mean, certainly, if Congress has the power to regulate commerce and to have, to regulate health insurance, certainly this would make it more efficient, right, Mark? More convenient. The Supreme Court said to this, no. In the Obamacare case, which we'll read about in a couple weeks, the Supreme Court said that that is too great of a power to be associated with commerce, right? They can regulate health insurance markets, but they don't have this additional great substantive power to compel people to buy insurance. That was a bridge too far. That was a tail wagging the dog. So to answer your question, until Obamacare, there had never been a law found invalid under the necessary and proper. Obamacare was the first. Then the Chief Justice was attacked, so everything was okay. But we'll get to that in a few weeks. Any other questions about McCullough or Youngstown? Okay. Today, our focus is on the legislative power. And what I want to discuss for today is how the Constitution puts limitations on the authority of Congress. We did in the last class how Congress puts limitations on the power of the president. We talked about this in Youngstown, right? In the class before that, we talked about Marbury, right? What are the limitations on the courts in terms of jurisdiction? Today's class asks, what can Congress not do? So we start, as we always do, right? With the text of the Constitution. All right, where did we finish last time? Yes, thank you. That's Adriana, right? Adriana, and see, I got this fancy new type seating chart, so I don't have to look at your like illegible handwriting. So I can. This is why I'm always like, what does that say? Anyway, I do my best. Anyway, it's typed now, so I can figure out who you all are. Adriana, what powers does Congress have under the Constitution? These are trick questions. But what powers does Congress have? Good. And what are legislative powers? What does that mean? You know, we discussed what judicial power was, right? We discussed what the executive power is. What are these legislative powers, Adriana? I'm sorry, the last one I didn't hear what you said. Okay, good. So the legislative powers means Congress can make laws. Yes, ma'am. She said it includes the power to make laws.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, this chair was squeaking around. I couldn't hear. It was tough to hear also. Okay? It's a squeaky chair, not your fault. The squeaky chair gets the grease, right? See, he has the only chair that moves. That's where I would always. Oh, the corners. Okay, I got you. So the legislative powers, like Adriana says, a power to make laws, right? And there are lots of limits we discussed later about what kind of laws they can make. But for today, I want to focus on the how. How does Congress make laws? So, you waving at me or? Oh. This is why I hate the sign-in sheet, because it's always so annoying, people at the other side of the room. I had one student last time, so I would always actually walk around to the back and go get it, but that was a little overkill. So, let's see, Earl. Earl, what is the biggest check on Congress's ability to make laws? The biggest check on Congress's ability to enact laws? And the answer is not the veto. Not the veto. What is the biggest check on Congress's power to make laws? Yes. Why? You said both houses. The phrase for both houses is what's called bicameralism. Bi meaning two, cam meaning house. Bicameralism, right? Why is bicameralism the biggest check on lawmaking power? You're right. Tell me why.
It's difficult to get that amount of people.
Yes. Right? Think back to the first day of class, right? How a bill becomes a law. What has to happen? A member of the House introduces the bill. It has to be adopted by his committee. The committee has to vote on it and send it to the full House for a vote. They have to get a majority of the House with both parties, perhaps, voting for it. Okay, then what happens? Someone has to introduce the same bill in the Senate and has to get out of Senate committee where there's lots of chances to kill the bill, add amendments, and just let it expire, right? And then after it passes the Senate, right, what happens? The Senate goes to a full Senate vote. So all the things for the House, all the things for the Senate, and only then the president has to sign it. Now, the president vetoes very few bills. So really the biggest check on lawmaking is actually Congress itself, not the president, right? Is that Jessica? Kara. Oh, okay. So Kara, so the seats aren't exactly lined up. Kara, why do you think the framers made it so cumbersome to enact laws in this matter? All these, blocks and potential dead points for passing laws. Why do you think that was instituted? Oh, good answer. That's what Justice Kennedy says. How does making it harder to enact laws protect liberty?
The reason they set up the Constitution was because they had a monarchy, and that's what they were trying not to have.
Good, and I like the way you framed it, right? Justice Kennedy makes this point very eloquently among his other rhetoric, right? He says the separation of powers protects liberty. How? By checking authority. You basically make sure that only the good stuff makes its way through, right? If it's very easy to pass a law, we'll get lots of bad laws that are likely to oppress people, right? But if there's a law that must make its way through this maze, and someone says, wait a minute, that's a bad law, done. So the idea is the separation of powers make it tough to enact laws, to create as many possible points to stop a bad law. We don't concentrate all the authority in the hands of one person, because then that party or person can run around and make all these stupid laws that oppress people. Everyone get me so far, okay? And we get the requirement, what I call bicameralism, from Article 1, Section 7, Clause 2, if you will. And it says, every bill which have passed the House of Representatives and the Senate shall, before it become a law, be presented to the president. Okay, and right there spells out the process. A bill must pass both houses, right? We can't have the House say, you know what, we'll just vote on this and let the president sign it, right? Anything that the president will sign has to come through both houses. So this process is known as bicameralism and presentment. Bicameralism and presentment, okay? Why presentment? Because it's actually presented or given to the president. And the president can affix his veto or a signature onto it. Okay, everyone understand? And just in case there's any doubt, the next clause, Article 1, Section 7, Clause 3, right? This was the backup, right? So let me ask, is that Debbie? Debbie, what happens? Okay, so we have this provision here. It says every bill must pass the House and the Senate, right? What happens instead of calling something a bill, we call it a resolution? And Congress says, you know what? We'll have one House pass a resolution, and the president will sign it, and that will be law. Does that fly? Can we do that?
Because it just passes one house.
But wait a minute, it only says a bill. What we call a resolution. Read on to the next clause, Clause 3. Article 1, Section 7, Clause 3, where it's on the board here, for your convenience.
Is that the question of adjournment?
No, right here. It's underlined.
Making necessary. Shall be presented to the President of the United States.
What does that mean? What does that mean, Debbie? I'll bring here.
But I'm sorry, I think I heard you say a resolution would only pass one house.
Yeah, what happens if Congress says a resolution passes one house and the president can sign it?
Well, I mean, then you would disenfranchise the other house, rather than.
But what's constitutionally problematic about that? What does that language up there say? Can the president sign something with only one house? Why not? What language up there says that? You're right. What language up there says that? You went too far.
That's
Just start at the beginning.
every order, resolution, or vote to which the concurrence of the House.
Yes. The Constitution makes clear that nothing can be done without the concurrence of both, right, Debbie? Senate and the House. And only then can be sent to the President for presentment. So this was like James Madison's fall-safe thing. You know what? I am so certain that they're going to try and play fast and loose. They'll call it something else, right? They won't call it a bill. They'll say, oh, it's a resolution. And the resolution goes through the one house and the President signs it. Right? Imagine that, right? The House of Representatives passes a bill and the President just signs it, wherever it is, right? Does that have the force of law? No, because there's no presentment to it. Okay? Yes, sir.
So I just want to make sure I understood the process, but bicameralism and presentment are both synonymous?
No, there are two parts of the process, right? Bicameralism means the two houses vote, and then after bicameralism, you have presentment, where it's presented to the President for him to sign.
Okay. I just want to make sure I understood.
Yeah, it's a two-step process to make a law: bicameralism and presentment. Everyone understand that? In terms of ConLaw, this is one of the easier doctrines to grasp, right? There's all this vague stuff about due process. This is actually one of the, this is clear cut. Yeah, Mark. Yes, sir. Yeah, you can never have it with just one house voting and it goes to the President for a signature. Okay. Any other questions on that? Okay, so before I go to Chadha, I need to give you a little bit of a preview of what we'll cover in about a month or so. So, does anyone here work for the federal government? Where do you work?
U.S. State Department.
Okay, what do you do?
I am a fraud prevention.
Okay, fraud prevention manager. I'm sure you implement various regulations.
That's
That's
a CFR. We have
Oh, yeah. What's a CFR?
the Code of Federal Regulations.
The Code of Federal Regulations. Yeah, the Code of Federal Regulations. What the heck is that?
It is essentially Congress writes codes.
No, I'm so glad you said that. Who writes CFR? And the answer is not Congress. I just blew your mind.
Oh, you did it.
I am so glad you said that. Who writes the Code of Federal Regulations? It's not Congress.
The executive.
The executive agencies. So you work for the State Department? Every page in the CFR that reflects your agency was written by a State Department lawyer. Now you said what I think is most people think. Oh, you have Congress writes regulations, right? Wrong. Oh, you're gonna love this class, right? Hang tight, my friend. Hang tight. Stay thirsty, right?
Are you gonna bring something for me, Steve?
I'm actually engaged in a lawsuit against State Department, so we got plenty to go. Okay. I sued your boss.
Everybody sues my boss.
Actually, it was very difficult to serve process. That's another story. Actually, it is. To serve a federal official is actually very difficult because you can't get John Kerry in a corner. So we have today a system, the regulatory state, which I'm sure you've all heard of, right? And regulatory agencies, whether it's State Department, Commerce, Transportation, Health and Human Services, they write things called regulations, and they're published in the book you mentioned, the Code of Federal Regulations, CFR. Okay. Now, wait a minute. Didn't we just read here that everything that has a force of law must go through both houses of Congress, and the President, whether you call it an order or a resolution, whatever you want to call it, right? Debbie's nodding her head. Debbie, you're technically right. But what the understanding of this amendment is anything with the force of a law, anything equivalent to a statute must go through Congress and President, right? But the regulations that are enforced by state, by Aaron's agency, didn't go through the President, right? So what happened, right? Here's how modern regulatory law works, okay? So you said you do fraud detection? So Congress writes a statute that says, the Secretary of State shall issue regulations to help him better detect fraud. Okay. That's all the statute says, one sentence. Do we know what Congress wanted? Not really, but generally we know that Congress says the Secretary of State shall write regulations that affect fraud. Then the lawyers at his department write a bunch of regulations saying, okay, so we're going to have this type of fraud investigation, we're going to have that type of fraud investigation, and oh, if you do this, you'll go to jail, right? If you violate this regulation, you get fined, go to jail. Do you throw people in jail?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Right, so if you break this regulation, you go to jail. Marco. Oh, I'm sorry, wait. You're really close. Is that Pam? I think I jumped. Close. Pam, if he's throwing people in jail based on something that's not a statute, how does that have the force of law? How can a regulation, which is not passed by Congress and the president, have the force of law? But Congress passed a statute signed by the president saying the Secretary of State shall enact regulations to detect fraud. And then they wrote all these regulations pursuant to that statute. So who's writing the law there?
Whoever wrote it.
Was it Congress?
No.
Who was it? His boss, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so here's the deal, right? And this is jumping ahead, but I'll give you a nice preview. There's something called delegation. I'm sure you've all seen this word in different contexts, right? Marco, what does delegation mean, right?
Because Congress has the ability to give its powers to either the executive branch or the judicial.
Oh, that's a really good question. It's a close call. I'll get to that in a second, right? So delegation means Congress is basically giving what are effectively lawmaking powers to the executive branch agencies, right? Congress, with one statute saying make regulations about fraud, is giving authority to the agencies to do stuff that are not in the laws, right? There's no statute governing what he does. Very, very vague. But the courts have identified a limit, something called the non-delegation doctrine. Okay, what does this mean? Congress has to give some sort of guide, right, to the agencies so they know what to do. So the example I gave, the Secretary of State shall make laws regarding regulations regarding fraud, right? You know, it's kind of vague, but it's something an agency can work with. They know they have to get rid of fraud, right? What if the regulation said, Walter, the Secretary shall make whatever regulations he wants? Yeah, the Secretary has unlimited authority to make any regulation he wants. Is there any guide there, any principle to limit it?
No.
Yeah. Would a Secretary know what to do in that case?
No.
He'll do whatever the heck he wants, right? This is what would run afoul or violate what's called the non-delegation doctrine. The idea is that Congress has given lawmaking power to the agencies, right? Let me write this out for you. That Congress delegated lawmaking power to the agency. That is a no-no. Congress can give guidance of how to make regulations. They can't give lawmaking power. Okay, we get that. Now you might ask, Josh, but what's the difference between, you know, delegation and non-delegation doctrine? For practical purposes in the 21st century, the non-delegation doctrine is dead. We'll talk about this later, but the Supreme Court has basically said Congress can do whatever damn well pleases, and as long as they don't get something that's entirely stupid, the agencies can run with it. Okay. In other words, the court has basically said non-delegation doctrine doesn't exist anymore. It did in the 1920s and 30s, but now it's a dead letter. But why am I telling you about this, right? Because it provides the basis for our first case, INS versus Chadha. Okay, how does it provide the basis for Chadha? Congress doesn't provide very precise immigration laws. This is a topic we'll discuss. Okay, Congress gives a significant amount of discretion to the president to decide who to remove and who not to remove. Okay. And to use a contemporary example today that's often brought up, Congress only appropriates enough money to deport 400,000 people a year. Okay, there are probably about 11 million people who could be subject to deportation. Okay. So what happens then if an agency decides not to remove some people? right? And the agency says, you know what, this guy is not a high priority. We don't want to remove him. Because Congress delegated all this authority to the agency in the first place, does Congress have any say over it, Steve? Right? By giving all this authority, this discretion to say we deport these people, but not these people, has Congress kept a check on that process? That's why I'm asking it. I always say that. That's why I'm asking the question. Of course, it's a good question.
I would think that when you have issues that an agency engages in that come to a head, that Congress reestablishes authority.
But did they? When Congress passed a statute saying, basically, I'm going to summarize, the Attorney General should deport whom he deems deportable, right? The Attorney General should remove who he deems warranting removal. Does Congress have much of a say then if who gets deported?
I would think that they would be able to come back.
And that's what they tried to with Chadha, but stop moving away from my question. So stay with my question for a second, right? What happens if in an ideal world Congress says to the Attorney General, anyone who is here illegally and has no family members must be removed, period. Right? That was a statute. Anyone here illegally with no family members must be removed.
That makes the job of the Attorney General or the
very easy, right?
very clear.
But Congress also has to pass very precise laws. And Congress is lazy, very lazy. They don't like passing laws, especially laws that are controversial, right? That's a controversial law. People may not like it. So say, you know what? We'll give the Attorney General the discretion to decide who to remove or not sweat off our hands. But then what happens if the AG decides not to remove people that Congress doesn't like? Does Congress have any power then?
The question is, does the Attorney General have the power to?
I don't care about the AG. Does the Congress have the power to come back in and say we don't like that anymore after they've already given away that authority?
I think that the authority they gave away, that they could,
How do they take it back? What would have to happen to take it back?
well, to me, it's not even.
How does Congress do anything? What's the only thing Congress can do?
They can write.
A new law. But once they give away the power, unless they take it back, it's gone. Right? You know the expression, once you give something away, you never get it back. Once Congress delegates that authority to the Attorney General, unless they pass a new statute, they don't get it back. And Congress has gotten lazy over the last 70 years of just giving lots of authority to agencies and let them do whatever they want. Right? We don't sweat the details in Congress. Yeah.
So then it would go to the courts to decide, since they've ceded that authority, if they don't pull it back, you have a problem, just bypass that judicial.
Yeah. Well, not always, because courts are very differential to administrative agencies, perhaps too differential.
I mean, your only recourse would be.
And courts won't help you. That's a problem, Janine.
I'm confused, because I believe the discussion that we just had with Steve described Congress delegating lawmaking power to an agency, which is a non-delegation doctrine.
What did I say about the non-delegation doctrine today?
You said it's gone.
The Supreme Court has just given up on it.
Right, but you also described delegation as Congress gives lawmaking powers or authority to make laws to executive agencies.
You
So-
paraphrase that. I think I said effective. I think I said effective lawmaking.
Effective.
And I think I was
Okay, so-
careful about saying that. If I didn't, I missed it.
Okay,
But it's short of lawmaking. Go check back and see the video. But I'm pretty sure I.
Okay, well, I mean,
Yeah.
that's
No,
why
you're fine.
I'm
No, but it's a very,
confused
very
with
astute
this.
observation. But the issue is, right? The issue is, it doesn't matter anymore because the Supreme Court's given up. So effectively, the Congress can give total lawmaking powers to agencies, and the courts won't stop it.
So delegation still occurs, although SCOTUS has said the doctrine is no longer in existence.
They haven't said that, but they've basically given up on it. We'll discuss this in a couple of weeks. I don't want to get too far into it, but
Okay,
it's
but
necessary.
delegation is still.
There's always delegation is fine, but they can't delegate lawmaking powers. Yes, sir.
Does the judicial branch still have the same ability to, there's a non-delegating, the AG's office is making new laws? Does everything still, if you wanted to have a fight against the AG's laws, you still have a recourse?
Who are the parties being court if the agencies start making stuff up?
Well, for example, here it would be.
Right. So in order to get to court, you have to be injured. And so in this case, Mr. Chadha was about to be removed from the country, so he claimed an injury. So yes, and that's how this case came to power. The question is whether, well, not exactly, but yes, someone who's injured could sue, saying the agencies do not have the authority to do this action. Okay? So, the non-delegation doctrine basically doesn't exist. Congress has given away significant amounts of its authority. So they hatched an idea. How can we still check the executive branch when it does something we don't like? How can Congress assert its authority without passing a new law? And this was the origin of the one-house veto. The idea worked like this. We gave broad discretion to the executive to decide who to deport and when to deport. And what if they decide not to deport someone who we really dislike? For example, like Mr. Chadha, right? Poor Mr. Chadha, right? This is him, right? Here's his book, The Story of an Epic Constitutional Struggle. What if the Attorney General decides not to remove this Mr. Chadha, who we really dislike? Can we pass another law saying could we pass a law with retracting that delegation? Could we pass a law taking that authority back? Well, that's very cumbersome and takes a lot of time. I got a better idea. Let's pass a bill in one house, not both houses, one house, saying, no, you come back, okay? We take the authority back to that one person, and that person must be removed. So what the one-house veto was an idea of how to keep some of their authority in light of this massive delegation, right? So rather than writing a precise law, anyone who's here illegally and has no family must be removed, period, they said, the AG can remove whoever he wants, subject to our revision. Everyone get that point? The Attorney General can deport whoever he wants, subject to our revision with a one-house veto. We don't need to pass a new law and go through all the process of bicameralism and presentment. One house withdraws that authority from the AG. So in some respects, the one-house veto may be misnamed, right? Because it's not one house vetoing a law in the sense the president would. It's saying, when we pass a statute, we give you conditional delegation, a conditional delegation of authority, and we can decide to take that authority back by a one-house vote. So it's not actually vetoing anything. Similar to the line item veto, nothing was actually vetoed. This was effectively a withdrawal of authority that was delegated. Oh, this is how I see the case, not how the majority did, right? But that's effectively what's happening here. So to understand this case, and this is the point Justice Scalia made in the other one, it's a non-delegation doctrine issue, right? Once you give up that authority, can you take it back, and how? Okay. Any questions on that frame? Yes, Debbie.
So I just want to make sure I understand, the one-house veto, the idea came out of this case. It wasn't something that came up that was challenged.
The one-house veto existed for almost 70 years at this point. Okay. It's been around since 1930s, I think. Okay. And it basically emerged because once Congress started delegating authority, they went, wait a minute, we're not in control, right? We just gave up all this authority to the Attorney General. Let's keep this in our back pocket in case it does something stupid, right? Instead of passing a precise law, let's keep this one-house veto as a way to check a stupid decision, right? We give this authority to the AG conditionally, and we can withdraw it if it does something we don't like. Yes, sir.
One house is a little faster. I mean,
oh, much faster.
The time from having to jump to the Senate.
And especially the House, there's no filibuster. And this was passed one called a voice vote. There wasn't even a recorded vote. Basically, the House just agreed to it, without any debate. So basically, if one member of Congress wants to stop the removal of someone, or force removal of someone, easy, piece of cake. Yes.
Could you do a two-house veto and bypass the executive getting into it?
Well, if you do a two-house veto, why don't you have the president sign it?
No, he may not want to.
And then override his veto. Yeah. Yes, that's Yvette.
So are you saying that the Immigration and Nationality Act is a resolution and not
Oh, it's a law.
Well, that's what I thought, but where does the whole resolution?
Oh, resolution is only, this was James Madison's fear. Madison's fear was that Congress would try to evade the requirement of both houses by calling it something else. Instead of calling it a bill, they call it a resolution. They call it something else. So by making the section, I scroll up, by making section 7 clause 3, he says, look, you call it an order, a resolution, or any vote, right? This was Debbie's question. Anything you vote on needs to have both houses. I don't care what you call it. I saw a hand somewhere in the back. Yeah.
Congress trying to do essentially an executive power.
Ooh.
Carry out.
Can.
Or execute the law.
Yeah. There's weird separation of powers issues here. Because basically Congress telling the executive not to do something seems like an executive function. Steve, how should Congress tell the executive not to do something? What would be the correct way? Which power could it exercise? Which power does Congress have to check the executive? No. The easier one. What is the biggest power of the Congress? The purse. How could Congress use the power of the purse here to stop something? Defund it. Yeah, we almost defunded Homeland Security last year over the immigration action. Almost happened. Okay. Any other questions before it gets? Okay. Yes, ma'am.
If Congress had taken the time to go through the creation of the unilateral veto or whatever it is, and it went through all of that and got passed and signed,
Right.
could they go back and use that in practice?
Oh, that's what happened here. Unicameral vetoes went through the process, but the question is, was that statute constitutional?
Oh.
Could a statute allow that? I went to the court hold? No. So let's talk about the facts here, right? So we have here Mr. Chadha. Okay, he actually came here legally on a student visa. As often happens, he overstayed his visa. Okay, the federal government found him, and they basically said, we want to deport you. He said, oh, please don't deport me. So they said, okay, we'll suspend your deportation, right? Congress gave the AG the power to suspend removal, to stop removal. Okay, someone in Congress found out about this and didn't like him very much. So they passed a one-house veto of this provision and said, sorry, Mr. Chadha, pack your bags. Okay. Mr. Chadha was obviously injured by this because he was about to be removed from the country. So he filed suit claiming that the one-house veto was unconstitutional. By the way, before I forget to note, do you know how Congress limits this discretion today? To a certain number. I forget the number, but it says the Attorney General can only cancel 500 removals a year. That's how I can't remember the exact number. It's like 500, something like that. So after this case, they said, fine, we'll limit it to a certain number of removals a year. So they still limit it, but not with this one-house veto. Okay. So, Mark, how did the court understand this unicameral veto in light of Article 1, Section 7?
Well, I think Congress was saying that in this particular provision, it couldn't be severed from.
I don't want to talk about severability yet. We'll get to severability later. Let's talk about Article 1, Section 7. Did this unicameral veto comply with bicameralism and presentment?
It did.
It did not. That's right. Why not?
Well, because there was no presentment.
Well, not just there's no presentment. What was lacking? There's two steps, right? Bicameralism and presentment. What was lacking?
Both.
Both. Everyone see this, right? The majority opinion by Chief Justice Berger was well done. I get to use it at least once. Right? There it is. Okay. So the Chief Justice says, listen, we have Article 1, Section 7. It says every bill or resolution or vote, whatever you want to call it, must have both houses of Congress vote on it, and then the president must sign it or not sign it. Mark, did either happen here?
No, only one house, essentially one house approved it, and it was never presented to the president.
Okay. The court calls bicameralism presentment an essential function, right? It's essential, okay? Yvette, why is this so important, right? Why is it so important to have this bicameralism presentment requirement? Yeah, why does, and then we touched on this before, but why does bicameralism require to protect the freedom of the people? Yeah, basically this prevents the concentration of too much power in one house. So imagine the House of Representatives became very corrupt and they gave themselves all this one house vote. They start canceling laws everywhere, right? It provides too much power in the concentration of one house. The Senate can't check it and the president can't check it. This is one of those rare cases, right? Where usually when a law is challenged in court, who's defending it? The executive branch, right? But here, know what the executive branch said? This law is unconstitutional. So who defended this in the Supreme Court? The House and the Senate had their own lawyers. Isn't that weird, right? Usually the House and Senate don't defend their laws, the executive does it. But when the executive says, I'm not going to defend it, the House defends it. This actually came up with the Defense of Marriage Act a couple years ago. President Obama said, I am not going to defend this law. So the House of Representatives hired a lawyer to defend on their behalf. Okay? The court also notes that there are some cases where houses can act alone, right? So for example, the House of Representatives can vote for impeachment by itself, right? The Senate can try impeachment by itself. The Senate approves presidential appointments by itself. The Senate can ratify treaties by itself. So the Constitution lists specifically where one house can act alone. But here it says very clearly both. Okay? Now, Aaron, let me ask you this question. Isn't the unicameral veto very efficient? Doesn't it make things a lot easier, right? Doesn't this give Congress a way to rein back in some of the power they're giving away? Shouldn't Congress defer? I'm sorry, shouldn't the court defer to this practice, which has been very popular? There are over 200 laws that have used it, right? Why should the court get in the way of an efficient practice that makes government easier?
It wasn't built for efficiency. It
Oh.
was built specifically to have a fight between the two houses in order to make a better bill.
Good. So what Aaron says is our Constitution wasn't meant to be efficient, right? Our Constitution was designed to have this sort of strife and conflict. Okay? Yes, sir.
We're still at 70-something years. I mean, what do we, so.
So let me ask you this question. Didn't we discuss in the last case that if something's been going on for a very long time, shouldn't we defer to it? Why didn't that happen here?
That was his question. So, how about that?
No, this is you.
I guess the tail was wagging the dog in this case.
Oh, now you're stealing my expressions, right? Fair enough. You're paying attention. It's always good. People repeat what I say. I'm happy, right? So, Naquanda, let me ask this question, right? What do we make of the fact that this has been done for almost 70 years and over 200 laws implemented this practice, right? Shouldn't this weigh in favor of the law's constitutionality?
I would think so.
Why?
Because
What's the value of this practice?
the government kept growing,
I'm sorry, the government what?
kept growing.
It
They had
did?
more responsibilities, so they used these things to help make it more convenient.
But what's the answer to that, Naquanda? Can the government just do things to make it more convenient for themselves here?
According to this case, no.
But what did Justice White say in the dissent? Everyone starts flipping ferociously, right? What did Justice White's dissent say?
That the case should have been decided on railroad grounds.
On what grounds? The case should be decided on what? I didn't hear what you said.
Railroad grounds.
narrower. Yeah, I can't say that word either, right? What does that mean?
That they probably should have found it constitutional.
Well, yeah, the dissent would have upheld it, but why? Okay, Amanda?
Or is it for the sake of other cases?
No, that's okay. Amanda, want to try it?
Well, I was trying to go back to what you were mentioning before, but why is it important?
Okay.
Well, one, to preserve what in fact Congress is trying to do.
Right. So the dissent says, why are we trying to get in the way and get rid of what they've been doing for a long time, right? Okay, so Amanda, let me ask you this question. Let's think back to all the way to Monday, right? And we had Youngstown, right? If we can remember that far back in time. And there were two opinions we spent a lot of time on, right? Justice Black was the majority, right? Remember how Justice Black approached the issue? You gotta speak louder. Yeah, Justice Black was very, we call formalistic, right? Very rigid. Article 1, Article 2, Article 3. Like, you have to follow the procedure very strictly, right? So, Amanda, which opinion from this case fits more with Justice Black? The majority or the dissent? It's on your notes. What do you think? Which opinion is more rigid, sticking to the text of the Constitution? No. Well, okay, let's see. Sophia, which opinion is closer to Black? Why? What text were they sticking to very tightly? Exactly. Right? They said, listen, it says here, every bill which passed must go through the House and the Senate and then to the President. If it doesn't comply with that to the letter, right, dot every I, it's unconstitutional. This is what Black was saying, right? You have Article 1, Article 2, Section 3. You can't have any mixture, right? Sophia, what about the dissent, though? What's the dissent closer to? Jackson, and he even cites Jackson. If you notice, the majority cites Youngstown, the majority. I'm sorry, the majority cites Black, the majority opinion, right? The dissent, he cites Justice Jackson. And he says, we have a flexible government. Do you have a question?
Oh, I did have a question. You know where you're saying it's Article 1, Section 7?
Yeah.
I feel like White does refer to that.
He does or does not?
He does, and he kind of contorts it.
Oh, how does Justice White contort? By the way, Justice White was an All-American football player at Michigan. This guy was a good athlete. Called him Wizard White. He played in the NFL for a couple of years. Very impressive guy. I have a picture of him somewhere. Yeah, there's Justice White. Yeah, he played All-American football at Michigan. Really good guy. Go ahead.
He didn't vividly stick to the text of it, but he did somehow say that this was accomplished.
Did you get that? You want to try walking that one through?
I didn't really understand it.
I was going to ask that, but since you're up, you can try it.
Okay. Well, he said that it did have the president's approval in the attorney general's action, and then the House and Senate indicated their approval by not passing a resolution.
Yeah. Everyone get this? It's really weird, right? So what has to happen for a bill to become a law? One house votes, and the president agrees. Here it happens in reverse. The president makes a decision, and both houses of Congress ratified after the fact. Whoa. The president says, I will not remove Mr. Chadha, and neither house takes any action. That's bicameralism presentment backwards. It's not a very good argument. And if it confused you, it should. Justice White was doing his best. If you notice, no one else joined him. The case was 7-2. Rehnquist, I will talk about Rehnquist in a moment. Okay? So Justice White, though, doesn't really hang his hat on the text, right? He basically says, listen, we have a government, right? We have a big administrative state. He quotes Justice Jackson again by saying that, quote, the administrative state is like a fourth branch of government. It is, quote, deranged, my God, deranged, our three-branch legal theory. And he's right. The code of federal regulations is nowhere in the Constitution, yet it has much greater impact of you than any statute, right? There are so many federal crimes in the regulation codes that we can't count them all. There have been efforts, so we can't count them all because they're so vague and nebulous, right? I'm sure your regulation's pretty open-ended.
Ours is 3 inches thick.
Yeah. So you can basically do whatever you want, right? Scary, right? Do we trust this guy? I don't. But who's going to check him? No one, right? So Justice White says the one house veto was a way to keep some check on these administrative agencies, make sure they don't screw up. But the court invalidated it and said, you're not going to have it. So here, with a rigid adherence to the text, this is Black, not Jackson, the court upheld it, saying, you know what, Congress? If you gave up your authority, too damn bad. Maybe you should have thought of that before you gave up your authority. Okay, and I don't know if you noticed this, but on the very last page of the opinion, right, in the very last, see if I have it up here, hold on. I want to just point something out for effect. What's that? Anyone know the page, the last page of the opinion's on? What is it? 269, okay. I promise this is worth it. 269, I should have had this right before and I didn't. 260, where is it? Okay. By the way, what did he say? I must dissent. What did he not say? Who here is attentive? What word usually goes before dissent? Respectfully. This is the drop the mic, right? I've actually counted these, right? When a justice says, I dissent, without saying respectfully, it's like an insult, like throwing it down, okay? So White's saying, this is so stupid. What are you guys doing? I must dissent. This is like a, you know, like throwing off your chest. This is a very big deal. And it's very rare you'll see this. When we read Justice Scalia's dissents, he often says, I must dissent. Justice Ginsburg does the same. They're the two biggest offenders, Scalia and Ginsburg. By my count, Roberts did it once, Alito did it once or twice. I have a running list somewhere on my blog where I keep track of these things because this matters to me. So anyway, let's talk briefly about Justice Rehnquist, who wasn't Chief Justice yet. It was just Justice Rehnquist. Is that Renee? So Renee, I'll give you a little help first, okay? When Congress passes a very big bill, right, they often put in a provision called a severability clause. And what that severability clause says is, if any one provision of this bill is found unconstitutional, just strike out the bad provision and let the rest of the law stand, right? Now let me ask you this question. When Congress passes a huge, big bill, right? If during the debate, if one sentence was removed, would the bill still have been enacted? Let's take this example. She mentioned the Immigration and Nationality Act, right? Would Congress have enacted the same INA if they didn't have the one-house veto in it? That's exactly right. When Congress passes these very important laws, a key provision, this one-house veto wasn't a small deal. This was a big deal, right? Congress would not have passed this law without this provision. So Renee, is it right for court then to go back and say strip the law of the key provision?
No.
It's fictional, right? And this is the point that Justice Rehnquist makes in his dissent. Justice Rehnquist says Congress would have never passed this law, right? Congress would have never passed this law without the one-house veto. It can't be severed. I'll give you another example. Obamacare, I swear, all year you'll hear about it. The individual mandate. The individual mandate is the cornerstone of the ACA. It says you must buy insurance. What if the court found that the mandate was unconstitutional? Could they have just let the rest of the law stand and just take out the mandate? No. Why? Without the mandate, Obamacare implodes. It cannot exist without a mandate. So the court said either all or nothing. This is perhaps why the Chief Justice ruled the way he did. We'll talk about that later. And by the way, okay. And by the way, this is good old. I don't have Rehnquist. Oh, but I do have a treat for you. I actually have. I got a copy. I collect these of William Rehnquist's yearbook from 1942. I got in the mail yesterday. My girlfriend got it for my birthday, and that's William Rehnquist in 1942 in his high school yearbook. I also have Ginsburg and Scalia's yearbook. If you want to come to my office, I have them upstairs. Anyway, they're cheap, but they're fun to have. Okay, any questions about Chadha and the one-house veto? Any questions? 1, 2, yeah. Aaron, go first.
Okay, so I just want to make sure I understand. You kind of prefaced it with today in 2015.
Yes.
And we kind of discussed the non-delegation doctrine.
Yes.
Would this still be good law today?
Yes, and in fact, the next case with Clinton v. New York expanded on Chadha in a number of ways. Okay, the one house veto is dead, gone. You know, for all of Justice White saying, how can Congress possibly exist without it? Well, they haven't had it now in 30 years, and things are still chugging along. So I guess they manage. Yeah, Lindsay, go for it.
Why is it not constitutional for Congress to be able to take their power back? Like
They can, but they're too chicken to do it. Because it's a very difficult decision to say, okay, agencies, you don't do this, we'll take care of it. That means you have to write more laws and do more stuff, and Congress is lazy. Congress doesn't like doing stuff. But I wish they would. I wish Congress would reassert their mantle. It would be very important. They've abdicated a significant number of their responsibilities. Right? To use an example, we'll do war powers in a minute. We're engaged in a number of wars. And Congress hasn't seen fit to vote on it one way or the other because it's a controversial vote. Might be unpopular. These are just let the executive do what he wants. It's a dangerous, dangerous abdication of their responsibilities.
But in order to get that power back, it still has to go through both houses.
And do you think the president will sign any law that takes away his power? Exactly. The president will never give up his own authority. So you have to basically override a veto to take your power back. Once you give up your authority, you don't get it back. It's a very sad state.
I was just going to ask, but then they've got the 2/3 to override the veto. So
And
if they
effectively,
really want to take it back, they can.
and well, the veto override is almost impossible because of the party system. The president's party will always vote to oppose a veto. So it's just simply not possible. Steve, your hand was up too?
Yes, sir. Just to note that I ran across on this case that the student must be cognizant of the nature of Congress's action and that they're legislative in nature. And Congress has to comply with the constitutional requirements of bicameralism and presentment.
Yeah.
And that made me wonder about.
Where are you reading this from?
Oh, it's just, I'm still waiting on anything. I got secondary sources on it.
Okay.
But when I think about the Constitution, does this apply to their enumerated powers in the Constitution that mean like their power for post office?
Yeah, Congress has given broad powers to the Postal Service to make regulations. Yeah. Very few laws are actually signed. I think the number is about 100 a year. There are very few laws actually enacted every year. There are thousands and thousands of pages every day published in the Code of Federal Regulations. Thousands of pages every day. If you tried to read them all, you would die. You couldn't. Your life is not long enough to read every single page of regulation. I mean, Congress doesn't even read the bills they enact, so who the hell reads anything anymore, right? Okay. It was funny. The chairman of the committee that wrote the Affordable Care Act committee never actually read the entire thing. So, you know, we'll pass it all. We find out. Pass it, then we find out what's in it. Okay. Any other questions about the one house veto, please? Going once, going twice. Okay. All right. So that case, the Chadha case, was very significant because it's a structural case, right? And the structural cases put checks between the branches. So what's interesting is in the Chadha case, the president and Congress disagreed. Right? The president and Congress disagreed. Congress wanted the one house veto, and the president didn't want the one house veto. The next case we're going to be doing, Clinton v. Jones. Clinton v. Jones. That's a different Clinton case. Sorry, there's several of them. Clinton v. City of New York is where Congress and the president agree. So the background of this case is that in 1994, the Republicans took the House for the first time in like 50 years. And Newt Gingrich, who was the speaker, had something called the Contract for America. And one of the proposals was we need to be able to cut spending. And the way we'll do this is to give the president a line item veto. Okay, this is an authority that many governors have. We have it here in Texas. Okay, And it basically says the executive can cancel certain spending items. Okay, so imagine this. You can't even fathom this. A Republican Congress giving a Democrat president the power to cancel stuff, right? Different time 20-something years ago. But what's significant is that the president and Congress agreed. To Lindsay's question, Congress was willing to give up some of its power to spend money, and the president was willing to take this power not to spend money, right? It's almost backwards. Usually Congress wants to spend as much money as it can to bring pork home, right? And the executive is happy to spend as much money as he can because it's more authority for him. Now, both branches agreed we need to rein back, we need to cut back on spending, right? Was this a good idea, a bad idea? Who the heck knows? But unlike Chadha, both parties agreed, both houses agreed. Janine, before I get too far, should it matter to the court whether the houses of Congress agree on this authority, that they agree to shift this discretion from Congress to the president?
Should it matter to the court?
Yeah.
That the House and the Senate.
And the president, all three,
Okay.
they all agree.
Agrees?
Should that matter?
No.
Why not?
I'm gonna go back to checks and balances because just two wrongs don't make a right.
Go back to Justice Jackson, right?
Mhm.
How do you think Justice Jackson will look at this issue? Oh yeah, remember that? Remember that? The three zones, right? How do you think Justice Jackson would treat it when the president and Congress agree to share this power?
I think Jackson would be okay with that.
Why is Jackson okay when the president and Congress agreed to make judicial review very light and not much scrutiny?
Well, if I'm remembering correctly, I mean, if all three of them agreed.
Well, not three, two. The courts are yeah. But what's the significance? Why Jackson make that the first zone? You want to give it a go? Cameron? Why should it matter? Why did Jackson say if the president and Congress agree that courts should not be so eager to second guess?
Yeah, one day.
No, it wasn't. You'll need to know this in May or December, whenever your exam is. So just got to put this under your belt. You don't need the thing of the case. Why should it matter that Congress and the president agree? What's significant about that?
It makes it simple.
How does members of Congress and members of the president? How does the members of Congress and the president get into office? How do the members of Congress and president get into office? And what happens if these elected officials do something stupid? They get thrown out. So what's Jackson's insight? Why does it matter if the elected branches agree? Who is effectively agreeing with him then? The people. Exactly. Right? Because when both branches agree to share the power, you can presume they're doing something that will get them reelected. Right? People in Congress don't usually do stuff that will get them thrown out of office. So when everyone agrees, presumably, the people are behind it. And Cameron finished it up. If the people are behind it, what are the courts supposed to do? Yeah, let it go. Let it go. Don't hold it back anymore. Right. So one perspective, we might call the Jacksonian flexible perspective, is if Congress and the president agree, why are we courts supposed to get in the way of this novel invention? Okay. Roy, what's the other perspective, right? I think this is what Janine was getting before. Should it matter whether the parties agree to share their power? Should it matter? Say something. This is not an answer.
Yeah. I mean, it should matter. I mean,
why? Why should it matter?
They've weighed the call.
No. Why should it matter that the branches are agreeing to share their power, right? Why is it not sufficient reason, right? Why should we not care that they want to share their power?
I guess in times of specific times, desperate times.
These are not desperate times. It was 1994. I mean, things were okay then. No foreign crisis there. It's not Youngstown. Why should the courts not care that they're willing to share their powers?
If the end result is,
You're not answering my question, right? What's the problem with the parties sharing their power?
it wasn't meant to be shared.
By what? By what? How do we know that?
Oh, by the Constitution.
And what part of the Constitution?
Separation of power.
Yes. The idea is, and this is Justice Black, the parties can't share their power even if it's convenient. Everyone understand that? Even if it's something convenient and they really want, the parties cannot share their authority. Right? They can't shift from the legislative to the executive. Josh, what about the non-delegation doctrine? That's where the non-delegation doctrine comes from. That the legislature cannot share their power with the executive branch, right? That's why the doctrine was invented. Now, the Supreme Court ignored it because of the administrative state, and they couldn't destroy it. But the theory exists because you don't want parties sharing their authority. So the exact same debate we had with Justice Black and Justice Jackson repeats in Clinton v. New York. Justice Kennedy is very rigid and formal, and he says that the parties cannot share their power even where they agree. That's Black. The dissent by Justice Brier. Justice Brier is Mr. Pragmatic, Mr. Let's be practical here, right? If the parties agree, and the president agrees, and the people agree, who are we to have such a hyper-technical reading of the Constitution? It's like Justice Black saying, yeah, it's close enough. You flip it around, you turn the Constitution upside down, you look at it against a light, whatever, right? The same debates play out over and over again. That's what I want you to see. There's nothing new under the sun. There really isn't. Just different names and different faces with different problems. Yes, sir.
You're coming out with different results.
Ah, good. So how did the court? You're next up. So how did the court come out in this case? Who won?
They ruled opposite than they did the first time. This time they basically said it would be.
Well, is it different? What did the court hold in Chadha? Do we have to have a technical reading?
We're going back to the original Jackson case.
Jackson wasn't the majority opinion.
That's right.
Oh, see, I faked you out, right? Everyone gets wrong. Who was the majority opinion? Black.
Okay.
So here, once again, in Chadha, formalism won. Chief Justice Berger, remember his well-done opinion, was very formalistic. In this case, in Clinton v. City of New York, is Justice Stevens, who's no conservative. He's a big, prominent liberal justice. He votes saying that this line on veto is unconstitutional, right? Right? Is that Jared?
Yeah.
Jared, let's just walk this through, though, because the process of how this veto works actually matters significantly. So explain to me how this veto actually works.
For the procedure of it?
Yeah, how can Congress passes a spending bill, and then the president signs into law. Okay, then the president finds a provision he doesn't like in the spending bill. What happens next?
If he doesn't like it, then
Don't put a ring on it, right? No, nothing. Go on.
he can, well, it says it doesn't grant authority to cancel the disapproval bill.
You're jumping way ahead. If a president finds that he doesn't like something in a bill, what does he do? How? What? Be very precise.
I guess by the power given to him.
No, you don't know? No. Okay, Nikolai.
Yeah.
How does the president go about canceling a spending provision?
He just decides.
What does he do? I need the process because it really matters. What does he do?
He goes to the House and says that.
Good. He transmits a message to Congress, right? The president finds a provision that he wants to cancel. He transmits a message to Congress saying that I am going to cancel this provision. Nikolai, what happens after that? What's Congress's options after the president decides to cancel it?
Well, they can't really do anything because they're delegated.
No, that's not right. Can Congress disagree with the cancellation?
Yeah, that's it.
How?
By doing nothing.
No. No. Toshiba? Use the right words. What can Congress do if they disagree with the cancellation? Let me give you an easy one, right? What's the only way Congress can take action? I'll give you a hint. Want to try again?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Change the law. Write a new one.
Yes, but what's it called? Anyone?
Disapproval.
A disapproval bill. A disapproval bill. Yeah, you're both on the right track. Okay, so what happens is this: the president sends a message to Congress saying, "Hey guys, I'm going to cancel this provision." In this case, it was a spending issue in New York City when this guy Rudy Giuliani was the mayor. Okay, this is when he still had hair, when he was election mayor of New York. The comb over just got much bigger now. So they send a message saying, I disapprove. If Congress agrees, they do nothing. If Congress disagrees, both houses, as required, vote on a disapproval bill. And that disapproval bill is sent to the president. And Toshiba, what happens after that? What are the president's options? You're thinking way too hard. What can the president always do when a bill comes to him? Exactly. So you see what they were trying to do? They were trying to comply with Article 1, Section 7, right? They passed a spending bill. The president signed it. But then he sent this message back. So what can Congress do? Pass another bill. The president can veto it or not veto it, right? So effectively, they tried to graft this line item veto onto the Article 1, Section 7. They were trying to avoid Chadha, because everything happens with both houses voting and the president signing. In each instance, the formality of Article 1, Section 7 is complied with. Okay? So Chadha, the first case we did today, was about, was Congress complying with Article 1, Section 7? This case was about something different. This case was whether the president was complying with Article 1, Section 7. You see, that's why the case is back to back. Chadha was the one house veto complying with Article 1, Section 7, right? The answer was no, because only one house is voting. Here, the question was the president complying with Article 1, Section 7. So, Jennifer, right? When a bill is sent to the president, right? What are the president's options under the Constitution when a bill is sent to him? Or, yeah, under the Constitution, Justice Stevens says to the majority, there are two options. He can sign it, or he can veto it. If he signs it, it becomes law. If he vetoes it, it's dead, or the Senate can override him. Jennifer, let me ask you this follow-up question. Is there an option C in the Constitution if the president likes only part of it? Jennifer, what's presented to the president? Yeah, let me go back up. I'll scroll so you can see it, right? What, be very precise, what is actually presented to the president? The bill, right? Is that parts of the bill or the entire bill? That's right. The entire bill. All of it. The bill was presented to Bill Clinton, right? Everything was presented. So, Jennifer, is there anything saying the president can pick and choose which parts he wants?
No.
Okay. And this was how Justice Stevens approached it, in a very formalistic, rigid sense. It says the bill is presented to the president, and they can sign it. Those are the only options, either sign it or not. Okay, everyone get that so far? Okay. So Chadha was about the formal requirements of Congress under Article 1, Section 7. And Clinton was about the formal requirements of Article 1, Section 7 for the president. Okay. There's no provision here. There's no provision for anything other than signing it or vetoing it. Okay. And they rule this on very narrow grounds, right? They don't say, right? They don't say that giving the veto to the president is lawmaking, right? They don't make the non-delegation doctrine. Caleb, what would the argument be that this violates the non-delegation doctrine? How would the argument go?
Just to refresh my memory, non-delegation doctrine is that you can't grant lawmaking abilities, right?
To the executive.
I believe that Justice Kennedy says that the argument made is that there's no threat to the liberties of individual citizens. He says that that's inadmissible. The Constitution structure is required.
You're answering my question about 5 minutes from now, but answer this question first, please. You're exactly right. But with a question I want you to answer now.
Violate the non-delegation duty?
Why would this violate the non-delegation doctrine? The court didn't reach that, but it probably would. Why didn't it reach that issue?
Because
What's the answer why it would violate it?
Because Congress can't delegate lawmaking abilities.
Is the power to pick and choose which provisions become law a congressional duty or executive duty?
It would be a congressional duty.
Exactly. So here's the issue, right?
By giving the president the line item veto, they're effectively giving the president the same power they have to pick and choose which bills to enact, right? Congress, when they're writing a bill saying, okay, well, this provision and this provision, but not this provision, they're giving that power to the executive. That would be a no-no. And Justice Stevens makes a very narrow point saying, listen, we're not going there. But guys, this could be really bad, right? You're giving pure lawmaking power to the executive. That you cannot do. He doesn't say that, but that's what's hinted at in the majority. You have anything here?
Are they giving them lawmaking ability, or are they giving them the judicial ability to say the law? Since he already signed it, it's already a law. There's nothing choosing what parts of the bill becomes law and saying parts of the law that he enacted are no good. He wants to take them out.
Yeah. This law is a mess, right? It's like unconstitutional on 5 different levels. But I think you also have the judicial aspect.
What? Okay, I think
You
I'm
know,
understanding. So isn't it also an issue that, so the executive's power is to execute the law?
Yes.
So if he's going in after the bill's become a law, and then he's going out and canceling something out, I would think that's not faithfully executing the law.
Yes, okay. So is he faithfully executing the law when he's saying, yep, not going to enforce that, not going to spend that money? So I'll get to you guys in a second, but it's something called impoundment, right? This was, remember Scalia's saying that Richard Nixon was Mahatma Gandhi of impoundment, right? What the heck is impoundment? President Nixon said, you can't make me spend money. So Congress appropriates money for, say, the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. Nixon's like, I'm not spending that, too bad. And the Supreme Court said, you are required to spend money that Congress appropriates, because that'd be a faithful execution issue. Mark, your hand us up?
Yeah, so basically, a new law is created. The president only has the power to either sign it or veto it.
Right.
So if he says, I'll sign it with the exception of this part, then that's how it becomes a new bill.
Yes, it's a different bill. The bill that passed both houses is not the bill he's signing. So let me give you an example, right? Let's real easy example. Let's say there's a 10-page bill, right? And you know, Congress signs it and the Senate signs it, right? And then somehow from going from the House to the White House, one of the pages goes missing. Right? It's a stupid example, but the president signs with a page missing, it's not the same bill. If there's a typo, it's not the same bill.
And the Constitution doesn't allow Congress to even...
They have to vote on it again.
Okay. Yeah.
This even comes up with constitutional amendments. So back in the 1780s, when everything was written by hand, try getting the exact same text to all the 13 colonies. There were actually variations in the Constitution. And if you want to be really technical, they voted on different versions. Yeah. Shiva, your hand was up a minute ago?
No, I was just agreeing that basically, since he's already signed it, he's actually doing
That's what the court says, right? I saw a hand somewhere here. Yeah.
When you say Congress gives up power way too easily, it seems they do.
They do.
What do they get out of what are they getting out of this? Is it just for the purpose?
They can be lazy.
How so though? Like,
because they don't have to take responsibility for tough decisions. Passing a law saying you get this benefit and you lose that benefit is very uncontroversial. They'd rather let some unknown bureaucrat publish in a code of federal regulations that's unaccountable.
And in this case, it would be on the president. They say
it's not even the president. It's on some unknown bureaucrat in Aaron's office. You have no idea who the guy is, right? Exactly. You are that bureaucrat, right? After you get your JD, you will be that bureaucrat.
That's right.
Damn straight. Okay. I want to talk about, we'll go back to Kennedy and Brier last, but I want to talk about Scalia. Scalia's opinion, every time I read him, like, he's right. And I'm like, he can't be right, but he's right. Okay? So what Scalia says is this is basically a non-delegation doctrine problem. Right? He says, has Congress given away too much of its authority? He doesn't resolve that issue because effectively, again, the court has given up on this doctrine, and Scalia says, I'm not going there. But you can see he's basically saying this is a serious separation of powers doctrine. But then he uses one of my favorite lines ever. He says, the Supreme Court got faked out. Right? Congress faked out the Supreme Court. Is that Kevin? Kevin, does Scalia think this is actually the cancellation of laws? You read the dissent?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think he did.
No, he dissented. What did Scalia say? What was his point? Okay. So Jennifer? Jennifer, what was Scalia's point in dissent? Yep.
I'm sorry, I was in the bathroom.
I'm asking, what did Justice Scalia say is dissent?
What did he mean that the line item leader doesn't power to me?
Why?
Because it's implicit in the powers and the separation of powers.
I don't know what you just said. What do you mean?
Well, because it offers the checks and balances we're talking about.
No. Nuri?
Honestly, I don't know the answer to the question, but does it have to do with the three general considerations about the Constitution?
No. You guys gotta read the dissents really carefully. Do you have it? Marisol? Justice Scalia often says that dissents are he writes his dissents for the law books because he wants people to remember him. They're there for a reason. So what does Scalia say?
I mean, he says it's not anything different from what they've always been doing.
What have they always done? You're on the right track. That's good. What has Congress always done with spending since the very beginning of the Republic? Nina?
They're always done with spending and Congress always enact the budget.
Well, yes, they enact the budget, but how do they do it? How does Congress give discretion to the president to spend money?
Their legislation of the budget.
More. What do they say in the statute? It's not in the Constitution. For once, that's not the answer. It's in the case. Scalia discusses it. Elizabeth?
He said that there's no difference between Congress authorizing the president to spend something and then Congress authorizing money to be spent on it.
Exactly. That's exactly right. What's the difference, Scalia says? If Congress says the president can spend no more than $100,000, can he spend less? Sure. The president can spend $5,000 on this and $5,000 on that. Does he have to spend $5,000? No. The impoundment issue I mentioned with President Nixon, the Mahatma Gandhi of impoundment, right? By the way, do you know who Nixon's chief legal advisor was? Antonin Scalia. He was actually the head of the Office of Legal Counsel at the time, so that's a little dig at Nixon, right? But what does Scalia say? If Congress says you can spend $5,000, you can spend more, you can spend less. They say you spend at least $5,000, that's a floor, right? You can't spend less. But Scalia's like, you guys got faked out. There's absolutely nothing in this law that the president is actually canceling anything. He's just deciding not to spend stuff. This entire arrangement of the transmittals, all this other stuff, it doesn't matter. The fact is, by giving the president authority not to spend money, there's nothing wrong with it. Everyone understand that point? So let's go back to here. Jennifer, why couldn't Congress just pass that exact bill saying the president can always spend less money than we say? In every single budget, they say, president can always spend less money than we say. Why didn't Congress just do that? Wouldn't that have been easier? Oh, they're good. Yes, yeah, I'm glad you picked that. Elaborate. Why do you think a lazy Congress would not do that? You're right.
Because there's another way to get to that without passing a law.
What's the downside, right? What's the downside of putting in a bill saying the president can spend $5,000 in the city of New York or less? What's the downside to that?
He might choose to spend less all the time.
And how do you think members of Congress and their constituents would react to that?
Would probably not get reelected.
That's it.
Members of Congress from New York City would say, wait a minute, right? Why are you putting this in? My constituents are going to kill me. You're telling the president he can decide not to spend the money? I got to bring him the bacon, right? Bring him the big bucks, my district. So you're right. Congress was being lazy. So rather than putting in every single budget line item saying you can spend less money, they said, let's just pass this line item veto and let it be the president's fault when he cancels spending. Not ours, the president. Everyone see that? They were trying to pass the buck to the president. They were trying to shift political accountability to the president. And then why is that problematic, Neri? Why did the separation of powers not like shifting that accountability?
Because it can let the executive branch become more powerful, and if the president controls the budget, then he chooses how to spend it.
Yes, it distorts the political process, right? We have a political process where Congress does a budget and the president spends. By giving this authority over, the president not only makes the laws, but now decides how much money to be appropriated. Because Congress would just say, Mr. President, you get $1 billion, do whatever you want with it. Actually, it's too low. You get $5 trillion a year. Have at it, right? Then Congress doesn't need to make tough budgetary decisions. They don't. Is your hand up?
Well, I was gonna say, on Mary, what it ends up happening is the president could then punish a state.
Oh, good. I was going to get to that in a minute, right? What if the president really hates a state that voted against him in the Electoral College, right? What if President Obama says, ha, Texas, you keep suing me. Huh. You like having schools? Go. They're closed now, right? Those hospitals are really nice. No more Medicaid, right? Exactly. By giving the president the power to pick and choose which states get funding, he can punish. And also, he can blackmail. He can say, hey, Senator so-and-so, you really want that dam to be built, don't you? Vote for my bill. It starts screwing with the separation of powers because now the president has a responsibility over expenditures. So while the majority was like saying that this is really bad, right? They were really saying there's a separation of powers issue lurking. Scalia says in his dissent, which I think is right, although I go back and forth every time I read this, saying you guys got duped. Congress could have just said spend no more than this. But the fact that Congress didn't say that means we're trying to shift their power. That's why I go back and forth. I agree with Scalia, I don't. I always change my mind in this one. I can never make up my mind. So everyone understands the difference between Stevens and Scalia. We'll come back to the Kennedy and Brier in a minute. Put your hand up or you're thinking. Anyone on Scalia and Brier? I'm sorry, Scalia and Stevens. Okay. Let's go to our overlord, our supreme overlord, a guy named Anthony Kennedy, who was the most powerful man in America by a factor of many. You think the president's more powerful? Not really. Okay, only slightly joking there. Slightly. All right, so let's go back. Okay, so is that Clint?
Yes.
Clint, what did Justice Kennedy say in his concurring opinion, which mostly was response to Justice Brier? Actually, let's start with Brier, because it's more fun. What's Brier's point? What does Justice Brier say in his dissent?
He said that it gives a means to the same end.
What do you mean?
It allows the president to make decisions about how to enforce
the laws, it's just in a different way.
Well, Clint, let me ask this question like this, right? Brier goes like this. He says, when the very first Congress met, their budget was like 1 paragraph long, right? Would it have been possible for President Washington to say, you know what? I don't like line 20 of that paragraph. I'm just going to veto the entire thing, send it back without that. Would that have been feasible?
That would have been easier.
Okay, today the budget's like 50,000 pages long and no one actually reads it. Is it feasible for the president to say, I don't like that one thing on page 523, I'm going to veto the entire thing? Is that feasible?
No.
So what's an alternative to that sort of all or nothing approach? I mean, what did Congress do? What did Congress and President Clinton do here? What was the alternative to the all or nothing approach?
Doing the line item.
Exactly. Brier says like this. In our modern day society, in the year 1995 or 1998, whatever year this was, right? We can't have the president go line by line and veto an entire bill if he disagrees with part of it. This is something to make our democracy work. In fact, that was the title of Justice Breyer's book, Making Democracy Work. His entire existence is how to make government work more efficiently. Right? He says, listen, let's be like Justice Jackson in Youngstown. Like, let's not be so rigid. Let's think of McCulloch in Maryland and Chief Justice Marshall. Let's be flexible. Let's let our Constitution adapt. And specifically, Taylor, we mentioned this a minute ago, we have a situation here where Congress and the president agree. How should that affect judicial review from Justice Breyer's perspective?
I think he didn't think it was a problem. He thought that if they agreed, then I think also that he thought that it didn't need to be so much like a formula.
Yeah.
That if they agreed, then what's the problem?
Yeah. So I want you to pay attention because we'll do this in a couple weeks with the case of Noel Canning, right? Justice Brier says when the president and Congress agree, like Jackson said in Zone 1, judicial review should be very light. We should not be second guessing the branches when they agree, because what does that mean? The people back them. And in fact, the Republicans were elected to the office on this platform, right? There was an election saying we want to do a line item veto to cut spending, right? This was part of the democratic process. Brier say, how can we know better than them? Shouldn't the people decide how best to rule themselves? And this is Justice Breyer's existence. He even admits, I love this expression, it, quote, skirts a constitutional edge. He's like, it's close, right? This is probably a close call, but for Brier, the tie goes to democracy. When it's, you know, interest here and interest here, the little scale, the presumption goes to constitutionality. The presumption goes to democracy, not to individual liberty, right? Now, Justice Kennedy, Bridget, replies ferociously, in fact. This is one of his more angry dissents. He's usually very gentle. But here you can tell he's actually pissed off, right? What's Tony talking about here? Tony is Anthony Kennedy. We call him Tony for short, right? Or if you want to be called AMK, Anthony McLeod Kennedy, called by their initials. So, Bridget, what's AMK up to here?
He's saying that I don't think he agrees that it's not a problem with the separation of powers. I think he's saying that separation of powers is central to ensuring so that they should, it does matter that they.
You said one thing that was right, one thing that wasn't. Say it again. You were half right, half wrong. You started off right, then you ended wrong. But start again.
Okay, I think he is saying that it does violate the separation of powers.
It does violate separation of powers. Why should it not matter that the public wants it? This makes government more efficient. How does he reply to Justice Brier on this point? He makes this point very fiercely. Want to try it, Tam?
I think he said if just one single branch has so much power, it will threat the liberty.
Yeah. He basically says the collection of so much power in one branch threatens tyranny. And we already discussed how this happens. What happens if the president now becomes responsible for spending? He can decline spending for states to punish them. He can blackmail states saying, I will cancel your bill unless you pass what I want. This gives so much authority to the president. And Daryl, does it matter that Congress wants to give up this power to the president?
It matters to him because he says the Constitution and Compact enduring for more than our time. If one Congress gives it up, they can't do it for the other Congresses to come.
Yes.
It affects the very concept that the founders had of liberty.
Exactly.
You have to maintain that regardless.
He basically says the abdication of responsibility, that Congress's abdication of their lawmaking powers is not part of our constitutional design, right? Our Constitution doesn't countenance giving up constitutional authority. Even if they want to, right? Even if Congress wants to be lazy and let the president make the budget, that's not their power to give up because the Constitution preserves it for eternity and not just for any one Congress. Because once you give a power up, it's impossible to ever reclaim it. Okay. Any questions on Kennedy's dissent? Or Kennedy's concurring. He's very, very agitated here. I don't know why. He's usually much more poetic. He's very agitated. Yeah.
He seems to be upset that they did envision giving the president so much power, but did the Congress at all think about how they were going to check that power after they gave it away?
Well, how can they? What if they disapprove of one of the cancellations? What can Congress do?
Right, exactly. They gave up away the power. What is the Congress?
No, I'm asking you. Under the line item veto act, if President Clinton vetoed something, what would Congress do if they disagreed?
Because that's what we discussed earlier, right? The bill.
The disapproval bill.
Bill.
But then can't the president veto that also?
Bill, right? So then you have to have the
Yeah. So it effectively transforms, if you will, the budget process from a majority vote to a 2/3 vote. And oh, by the way, do you think every single time the president cancels something, they get enough votes to go override it? Most some people aren't going to care. If the president cancels some stupid little dam in New York, who's going to care in all the other 49 states? So effectively, it makes it impossible for Congress to reclaim this power, even though there was this disapproval bill process. And you can imagine presidents in the future start using this much more aggressively to punish people in states. It's a dangerous shifting of the powers. Although, again, I go back and forth in this one. This is a tough case. Okay. Any other questions on Justice Brier or Justice Kennedy's opinions? Janine?
I have a general question in regards to, it could be a two-part question.
Sure.
On page 275 with Justice Breyer's dissent, it starts off with Justice Brier, and then we know that Justice O'Connor and Justice Scalia join in, and then also then a few pages later we have Justice Scalia's opinion with O'Connor joining in and Brier joining in as part of it. So the first opinion is written by Justice Brier, and O'Connor and Scalia agree with him, and then Scalia writes his own opinion that Brier and O'Connor join in with.
Let me explain this to you.
Are they actually writing these, or are they like other appeals courts where they have staff attorneys writing their opinions?
Oh, God. I love questions like this. Okay, so here's how the Supreme Court writes opinions, right? And I like, there are a lot of good sites for legal information, but I like Cornell's Legal Information Institute. It's quite good. Okay? There are 9 votes. After a case is argued, they have a conference, okay? And at the conference, they vote how each of the 9 justices will vote. Okay, what does that mean? If all of them agree it's a 9-0 opinion, the Chief Justice, who's most senior, assigns it, who's going to write it. Usually one justice writes it, okay? What happens if it's divided? Let's say it's a 5-4, as often happens. The most senior judge in the majority will assign it, and that's usually the Chief Justice or the most senior Associate Justice. So in this case, what happened? There were 9 justices. Okay, the final vote was 6-3. Okay, so 6 of the justices wanted to affirm, 3 wanted to reverse. All right. Justice Stevens got the opinion from the Chief Justice, because the Chief Justice was the most senior in the majority. Okay, a concurring opinion can be written by anyone. Anyone can write a concurring opinion, and people can join it or not. The dissents are interesting. So let's go to Justice Breyer's dissent. Actually, here, let me just solve this. Here we go. This is going to look like a gibberish to you, but I promise it'll make sense. This is actually the vote breakdown. So let's read this line by line because Janine asked, right? Justice Stevens delivered the opinion of the court. That means the majority opinion. In which Rehnquist, the Chief Justice, CJ, and Kennedy, Souter, Thomas, and Ginsburg joined. JJ means justices, plural. Okay? So that means there were, let's count, ready? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There were 6 judges in the majority opinion. Okay? Justice Kennedy followed a concurring opinion. Okay? So he was in the majority, but also his own. Okay? Justice Scalia followed an opinion concurring in part and dissenting in part. One of the issues was involving standing, which I didn't make you read. You might have noticed they mentioned it. Don't worry about that. But Scalia effectively dissented from the whole of the opinion. But O'Connor joined it, but Brier only joined part of it. So the opinions are actually numbered: Roman numeral 1, Roman numeral 2, Roman numeral 3. That means O'Connor joined Scalia in whole, but Brier only joined part 3. He didn't join parts 1 and 2. Brier dissented in whole, meaning he didn't agree with the standing point. And O'Connor and Scalia only joined part 3. So basically parts 1 and 2 were about standing, okay? And Scalia and O'Connor only joined the third part. I know this looks like gobbledygook, but if you're going to read this later, this is in every Supreme Court decision, it tells you who votes how. So whenever you're, it's the end of June and the Supreme Court deciding cases, and you're fiercely trying to find how the court vote, you have to try to make sense of this. And it's often not clear. So the most famous incident is actually in the Obamacare case. I keep talking about it, but it's the biggest case of the decade, right? So what happened? Let's see if I can find it. Cornell. Googling. I don't want to dwell too much on this. Okay. So this was the breakdown of votes in the Obamacare case. I'm not going to read it to you, but look how confusing it is. That the Chief Justice had the judgment of the courts with parts 1, 2, and 3C. So basically, some parts of the opinion were majority, some weren't. This is why all the reporters got so confused and screwed up, because they didn't read it correctly. We'll talk about this later. But Janine, your question's very astute. It's often very difficult to find out how the judges vote, and sometimes they don't even tell you. Like they say, I joined this, but I want to explain why. It's complicated as heck. Right, any other questions on this? Not this, but the Clinton case. It's not clear.
So Justice Brier wrote that dissenting opinion
Which
that O'Connor and Scalia joined in, and then
only in part. The part you read, part 3, Scalia and O'Connor joined that part.
Okay.
You didn't read the part 1 and 2 unless you were Steve and read the entire thing.
Okay. But what was in our book?
Exactly.
That's it. And then Scalia writes the next one.
Exactly.
So when you ask of Scalia's opinion, you're meaning the one that
Scalia wrote.
wrote.
Exactly. Good question.
Thank you.
Thank you. And to the second part of your question, this is the justices do have law clerks. Each justice gets 4 law clerks. This is considered the brass ring, the most prestigious job any young lawyer can ever get. They hire 4 justices, about 36 people a year. The chief gets a 5th. Okay, this is like the most elite position a lawyer can get. And in fact, we have now several justices, Roberts, Kagan, and Brier, who are themselves Supreme Court clerks. Rank was a Supreme Court clerk before him. So it's a very significant credential. They're called the elect, the Supreme Court clerks. It's an entire genre of fiction even. There's a book called Supreme Ambitions by Supreme Court clerks. It's a good book. Okay, any other questions on this case? Yeah.
You want to mention that you're going back and forth on what's the flip argument about giving the president so much power?
That's the reason why I go back and forth with Scalia is he's right. This is effectively doing what they've done for centuries. It's effectively giving discretion to spend less of the amount. So it's actually just a label, right? If Congress just said you can spend no less than this and no more than this, it's the same exact thing. So you're really elevating formality labels to something that would be constitutionally okay otherwise. Yeah.
Isn't it kind of heading down that path of Weimar?
Whoa, you call me a Nazi? Right. So yeah, that's why I go back and forth, right? I don't go full Brier, but I go Scalia. I think Scalia's point is well taken, but I go back and forth. This was a tough call. It's a tough case. Yeah.
Seems like if you distill the logic of it, though, if they're passing a bill that has X number of items versus sending them X number of bills, it's essentially the same thing. It still takes the majority vote to get there. He vetoes, and then you're 2/3.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, when you distill the logic of it, it's very similar.
That's
They're just making a huge bill because it's more convenient than writing 500.
Yeah, I go back and forth, but you're right. It's effectively the same thing as vetoing just part of the bill, which is not allowed, but the Congress can do that by withholding, by saying you can spend as much or as little as you want. And any money you don't spend, bring back to the Treasury. Yeah. I think it's I would actually invalidate it as a non-delegation doctrine, saying you can't give the executive sort of authority, but I'm in the minority there. So under current doctrine, it's a close call. Yes, sir.
Now the line item is gone.
Kaput, gone.
So he wants to has to veto the entire bill.
That will never happen.
Only 600 pages.
Well, so what's interesting is during the last budget crisis last year, Congress threatened to defund the President's Homeland Security Department in opposition to the executive action immigration. And the President, I will veto the entire thing if you put that in there. A year before, the House tried to insert a provision, and Senator Cruz did as well, that was said to defund Obamacare. And the President said, if you put that in, I will veto it and basically shut down the government. So when people say that the senator actually shut down the government, it's actually a misnomer. It's the president refusing to vote on the budget that would shut down the government, right? He said, I would veto it, and never went to a vote. That's what actually shut down the government, but technicalities don't matter much. All right, let's talk about destruction of official records. Nixon, that is. Oh, come on. Oh, come on. Anyway. Thank you, my God. So, there are a couple stray provisions of the Constitution, which I don't say that they're inconsequential, but they don't fit anywhere else in the semester, so I put them here. They really don't. So Article 1, Section 10 says states can't pass what's called a bill of attainder. Michelle, what's a bill of attainder?
If I'm correct, this was a bill that would target an individual, particularly at the time it was up someone for a crime, usually someone who was against the country.
Why do you think the framers said that Congress can't pass a bill punishing a specific person?
Oh, wow, where's your due process?
Forget about due process. The Fifth Amendment hadn't been ratified yet. There wasn't a due process. Actually, the 14th Amendment hadn't been ratified. But
okay, repeat your question again.
Why do you think the framers were opposed to Congress passing a bill that punishes an individual person? Think.
That'd be like a king.
Or, in our system of government, who usually punishes people like that? Ah, so it would be, what would the states actually be doing? What would the state legislature be doing?
Acting like the jury, the judge.
Yes. It's a delegation issue of the judicial power to the states and their legislative branches. It would allow the legislatures to act as courts. The same way that a court can condemn a person to punishment, the state legislature could pass a bill, a law, that punishes an individual. This, the framers said, is a no-no. And the Constitution puts very few limits on what the states can or cannot do. The ones in Article 1, Section 10 are one of them, right? Congress cannot pass a bill of attainder, right? I'm sorry, no state shall pass a bill of attainder. So we have this case of Nixon versus the General Services Administration, right? What happened there, Andrew?
He had personal records that
Who's he?
Nixon.
President Nixon, yeah.
President Nixon had personal records that Congress decided to seize, and he was trying to argue that that was not constitutional because they were his own personal records, but they said that they were leaving documents that belonged.
Okay, right. So here's what happened. For those of you who were alive at the time, it wasn't, but in theory, what happened was, right? Yeah. What happened was this: President Nixon was crazy. Okay, he had a series of tape recorders hidden in the White House Oval Office. This is what it looked like, and it would basically start recording whenever any voices were heard. And he was paranoid like crazy, and he kept all these records, right? Okay, then he got in trouble for some stuff, Watergate and everything else, and he was about to be impeached. He resigned from office. Okay, fine. What happened? The federal government said, we want to take all of your tapes back. And he's like, no, these are mine. They're my personal property. So Congress said, okay, let's pass a statute saying anyone named Richard Nixon is required to turn over his tapes. It named him in the statute. Okay. Is that Timothy?
Yes.
Timothy, how the heck is that not a bill of attainder? It named him. His name was in the damn law.
I think Brennan said that the bill of attainder is an important bulwark against tyranny, but it said it doesn't limit Congress's power to legislate, basically, and that I guess that the tapes it was more of for materials and not exactly actually against him.
You're doing a very good job defending Justice Brennan, but there's no need to. This was a case where the court couldn't have ruled otherwise, okay? This is one of those political cases where the court had to rule the way it did. And I don't say it lightly. There's really not much analysis. The excerpt from your book is fairly short, and if it didn't make sense to you, the reason why is because it doesn't make sense. This case basically gutted the bill of attainder clause. If a law which says Richard Nixon is not a bill of attainder, then nothing is. They were not going to say to Nixon, you can keep your papers. It was too controversial, and I don't have a good way of explaining that. If you want to read the case for that, United States versus Brown, which was, I didn't assign it, but this is a case where the court said, we have a statute that says anyone who's a member of the Communist Party has some sort of punishment. And the court said that even that is a bill of attainder, because naming a group is singling people out. This case, I have no idea. Okay.
It's no different than Marshall just knowing that Marbury just wasn't going to win.
Something like that. Yeah, this was a case where the court had to rule the way they did. They could not rule in favor of Nixon. And I don't have a good answer for you, but that's about the best I can do. The last two provisions says that states cannot pass an ex post facto law, right? What's an ex post facto law? It's a law that criminalizes conduct after you do it. So like today, I'm standing here, I drive my car 60 miles an hour, fine. Tomorrow they pass a law saying the speed limit's now 50 miles an hour, and they arrest me for breaking the law. No go. States cannot change the law after the fact. One of the more interesting applications of this is sex offender laws, right? And this is actually a controversial topic people don't pay enough attention to. But if you were convicted of a crime 20 years ago, right, you served your time, how can they make you register as a sex offender now if that law was not in effect at the time of your crime? There was a case called Smith v. Doe, which I think was probably wrong. And the court basically said that the sex offender registries are civil, not criminal. And therefore, they're not subject to the ex post facto clause. The sex offender laws are very punitive. I don't buy that distinction. If you're a sex offender, you can't live in certain places, you can't be with your children, there's all these restrictions. It's extremely punitive. Any questions on that? It doesn't come up very often. Any questions on ex post facto? Okay, the last provision is also another dead letter of the Constitution. You love me telling you these ones don't matter, right? That's why I squeezed them at the end. It says, no state shall pass a law impairing the obligations of contracts. This was called the Contracts Clause. So basically, if the state makes a contract with someone, they can't pass a law to breach it. Usually, if a party breaches a contract, they have to pay damages, right? But what the legislature just says, no law with this company will be effective, right? You pass a law saying all contracts are now null and void. This happened with debt, okay? Imagine if you were in the early 1800s and lots of people had debts and they owed debt to a certain bank. What if the legislature passed a law saying all debts are void? They passed a law impairing the contracts. The Constitution says, no, you cannot do this. You cannot impair contracts by states. Okay? Unfortunately, during the New Deal, as most of our constitutional clauses went to die. There was a case called Home Building Loan Association versus Blaisdell, B-L-I-S-D-E-L-L, Blaisdell. What happened in that case? I think a city in Minnesota passed a law stopping foreclosures. They said to a bank, you cannot foreclose any houses. The bank says, wait a minute, I have a mortgage. This person didn't pay up his mortgage. Let me foreclose the house. Supreme Court said, well, you know what? In times of emergency, like during the Great Depression, they can impair contracts, no big deal. That case, Blaisdell, basically killed the contracts clause. It doesn't really mean anything anymore. So you see the Supreme Court's killed a lot of provisions of the Constitution. We have this nice book in our pocket, but they're like little holes, punched out through there. In fact, I mentioned Randy Barnett. He's a constitutional law professor. His book called The Lost Constitution has a picture of the Constitution with little holes cut out of the Constitution. I think it's an apt imagery. Okay? So any questions on ex post facto, bill of attainder, or contracts? I mentioned them briefly because they don't really matter too much. Yes, ma'am.
You can go back to what you were mentioning.
Sure.
Example, and I know you were relating to
Ex post facto?
yeah, and that's how you when it analyzes conduct after you do it.
Right. So it's like this, right? So say you were you had a sex offense in the 1980s, right? And you served your time and got out of jail. And then in the year 2000, your state passed the sex offender registry and say, hey, you have to register now. You're like, wait a minute, you can't punish me for a law enacted after my crime. So how did the Supreme Court get around that? It said that sex offender registries aren't criminal nature. They're civil. It's like a registration system. No, that opinion I think doesn't hold water, but that's the court saved those laws. Yes, Darryl.
Just real quickly, where does Article 1, Section 10 bind the federal government?
It doesn't. Article 1, Section 8 binds the federal government, and Section 9 as well. Yes, Jim.
Just to clarify, did I read it correctly that the first two bill of attainder and post facto apply to both states? And
Yes, exactly right. Yeah, the bill of attainder and ex post facto bind both the states and federal governments. The contracts clause, interestingly, doesn't bind the federal government. But of course, the court said it does because it's a matter of due process. The court basically said the contracts clause applies to the federal government. The courts don't like when the states and the federal government have different standards, even though it probably should be like that. Okay. Any questions? Yes.
So how does the, I guess the Homeland Security types of deals like Guantanamo, and that how does that apply to anything?
Well, the Guantanamo issue affects what's called the writ of habeas corpus, which we'll talk about in a couple of weeks. Which basically, habeas corpus literally means deliver the body. Corpus is a body. And that means you have to bring a prisoner to a judge, and the judge decides if the captivity is lawful. And the Supreme Court Guantanamo cases, which we'll study, had various opinions whether the people in Guantanamo who are not citizens get to go before a judge. And we'll talk about that much later. Any other questions? Yes.
Why did you not speak about Justice Thomas's opinion in the last case we did?
Justice Thomas's was in the book.
Well, I just noticed that there was something in that he made a comment supposedly. He thought that they should stand up.
I don't think Justice Thomas wrote an opinion in that case. I don't think
found it somewhere.
maybe a different case. I don't think he wrote an opinion in that case. Yeah, I mean, here's this.
That was about stare decisis.
No, Thomas didn't write in that case.
Okay.
All right, anything else?
Sorry.
Have a good night. Thank you.